And we are live with Ray Roldan. Oh man,
Hello.
thank you for being here.
Of course. Of course. I mean, hopefully my second vaccination shot, the side effects aren't going to start to kick in during this thing. But
Yeah. All of a sudden you're gonna be like, "Oh." Yeah.
exactly. I'll start shaking and then you won't know why. But
Which one did you get?
Moderna,
Oh,
so
okay.
which I hear the second shot of Moderna is like the one where you get the most side effects. So I'm
Yeah.
really hoping the thing
Well,
happens.
I got my fingers crossed for you because I had Pfizer. I'm doing all
Hmm.
right after my second though. It's pretty good. So
Oh, that's good.
Ray Roldan, you are the best of both worlds here. You are a publicist and a journalist. And,
Oh, such flattery. Thank you.
well, I mean, I've known you for decades, as you said earlier. And,
Well, it has been.
yeah,
It has been.
I know. I think I live in denial of how old I am, though. Um, but, you started off in Boston writing, correct?
Hmm. I was a journalist up in Boston for like went to college up there and then stayed up in Boston for a few years. Started a few magazines and a few fanzines and realized that you can't really survive up in a major city like Boston for maybe what 12 $13,000 a year. So moved back down to New Jersey slash New York and got the music business. And it's been good so far. Not making 12,000 anymore,
Yeah.
So
Now, when you were doing your fanzines and stuff like that in Boston, like which ones did you write for? Because I knew I read you before I met you.
yeah, I wrote for Mean Street Magazine, which was out in Southern California. I wrote
Ah,
for Cake turned into Toast Magazine in Minneapolis. QRM down in Louisiana. Wrote for Boston Rock in Boston.
Boston Rock was
Um,
the one I knew you from, I think.
and then you and I both wrote together for Consumable Online. You know,
Yeah, that
so
was the early days of online,
yeah,
huh?
exactly. I mean, back when it was just text, no graphics whatsoever.
I
But
still
yeah,
think
like I know.
people can find our stuff from Consumable Online if they Google it. Yeah.
Yeah, people actually find my Beautiful South interview that I did way back when. So I get emails occasionally about that, which is I think it was interesting.
Yeah, I think I did a Machines of Loving Grace interview that I remember
Mm.
for that. Uh, anyway, but yeah, so when did you decide it was going to be publicity for you as a job?
Well, there was a few publicists who were urging me to jump over to make that switch. One of them was Chris Ferraro at EMI, and because she and I did a lot of work together, and I think she had like EMF and Jesus Jones and bands like that,
Oh,
and so I was always writing about them, constantly because I love that whole entire Manchester scene, really all about like the Soup Dragons, all that stuff, and she kept on telling me that like whenever I was in Boston, I knew all the journalists up there, and I was able to work with the journalist and help her out with like press days,
hmm.
so. And she said to me, she's like, you're a natural at this. You should become a publicist, and didn't want to make that jump, but after a while, when you're kind of scraping the bottom of the barrel, like literally food wise, living in Boston, it was like time to make it. And when I moved down to New Jersey, there's a lot of people, a lot of publicists were on my side to help me find jobs, so I was able to find a lot, like jobs very quickly. And,
And yeah, and you had some really great jobs back in the
mm-hmm,
day. I remember because didn't you work at Grass?
yeah.
And
Well, in 2 years, I worked at 5 different record labels, and each one was a jump. It wasn't like the first job I had was a soundtrack label called Milan Records, doing soundtracks to like Stargate, Freddy Krueger's New Nightmare,
mm,
um, like I forgot what the name of Zoe's something that Zoe. But there was like the big soundtrack that we did was the Benny and June soundtrack. So
oh,
but yeah,
yeah,
like
that
I was
is.
there for like 2 months, and then from there I went over to IRS Records, and then IRS Records I was like an intern slash assistant that when the publicist who was there was fired, they put me in the position to become publicist. And I had only been a publicist for like no more than 2 months at that point. Not even a publicist. I was like an intern essentially. And so I was working with the Go-Go's, working with
Wow.
like Kirsty McCall, Stan Ridgway. And then I was there for about 3 months. And then I got pulled from there to go to Mammoth Records. And I was at Mammoth
God.
Records for 7 or 8 months, working with Machines 11 Grace, who you mentioned earlier,
Hmm.
Juliana Hatfield, Squirrel Nut Zippers. And then
Wow.
from there, I jumped over to Silvertone Records. And I was
Right.
at Silvertone, yeah, like, working with like Buddy Guy and John Mayall. And then I got absorbed into Jive Records, and I became the head of Jive Records for a little while, working Britney Spears, Backstreet Boys, A Tribe Called Quest, all that
Yeah.
stuff. And
Wow.
then I got my first real job. I mean, that was a real job, but my first, first job as a full-on, account exec when I went to KSA,
Yeah.
KSA / Pressier, which I turned into Pressier later, as you worked there as well. So
Yep.
that
I think
that
there's
was
a
when
few
everything kind of moved
firms.
forward.
I think there's a few firms that everybody has gone through at least one of them, and
Mm-hmm.
KSA was definitely one. It
Yep,
was like
tons of
KSA,
people.
Susan Blonde, MSO,
Surefire.
Surefire. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So it's like if you're a publicist in music, chances are you've worked at one of these places.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, at least.
Yeah,
But
so like those 2 years, I mean, I went from like I covered every genre of music imaginable, um, and like and the scary thing is like like it was such good prep work for me. Like a lot of times people will say like jumping from one company to the next looks bad on your resume, but
well,
I mean,
now maybe, but back then it didn't.
yeah, back then it was like, yeah, we like, it was kind of like sink or swim. It was like you wanted to kind of move around because you wanted to kind of get to know people. Like back then we all hung out. I mean, I remember like we would have you and I had a group of about like 20, 30 people of like DJs, journalists, publicists, marketing people that we would actually go from bar to bar all around like, Lower East Side
And we
together.
had expense accounts,
Yep. Expense accounts, especially. But
which is a
But
thing of
now
the
nobody hangs
past.
out anymore. Nobody, like, it's sad, but nobody hangs out.
Well, I think when COVID, lets up a bit and we can all go back, I feel like I might go out more
Hmm.
because I appreciate it more than I used to.
Hmm.
I mean, I would
Yeah,
always
I'm
be like,
dying for a pint of beer.
right, right.
I'm dying for a draft beer so badly. So,
Yeah, I mean, and I think we're all learning to appreciate those days because of
hmm.
this,
Hmm.
for sure. Now, what genre of music if you're writing, do you like writing about the most?
Well, that's a tough one because, like, when I worked, like, I write for American Songwriter, and
Hmm.
like last year, like in the last 12 months, I think I've written 100, 105 features.
Wow.
So, I mean, that's what happens with COVID. Like I started writing right when COVID started,
Yeah.
and like and so Dallas, the editor, was just sending me stuff constantly because he knew that I could actually write it, and like he never had to edit. I mean, that's like not to pat myself on the back, but I mean,
No, but you
editors
have to
like me.
be, yeah, you
Mhm.
have to be good because you're sending out the materials everyone's going to use. So,
Yeah, exactly. And so like when I was an American Songwriter, like like I was writing a lot of Americana, a lot about Americana, but also I was writing a lot of like offbeat bands, the kind of quirky, like the quirky pop stuff that I like. I loved writing. Like when I work for, like I write also for Aquarian Songwriter. I haven't written for them for a little while, um, but there I was writing for bands that like writing about bands that I actually really like, that I really really love. Stuff like Aldous Harding on 4AD Records. I think she's absolutely brilliant. I interviewed Lloyd Cole for Aquarian. John Waters, the director, who like amazing.
yeah.
But yeah, so like I was kind of using more Aquarian Weekly for stuff that I actually really that I myself really really love and can really dive into. And American Songwriter I was using more as a place where I can actually discover new bands myself because I love. I mean, a lot of publicists, I mean, a lot of people in the music industry, as you know this, don't really quite listen to music that much, you know. Um, I remember when I worked at, again, I was working at Island Records, you could walk down the hallways and it'd be quiet. You just hear people talking. No one was listening
Mm.
to music. But you get to my office and like I was always blasting music. You know, it was always like there's the, you know, I still love to find new bands and like, you know, discover that kind of thing, you know.
And you're encyclopedic too. I know because when I put up my tarot cards, you were on it and
Yeah, but
identifying all the new waivers.
yeah, new wave and goth are my love, you know.
Yeah.
I'm a goth.
Yeah, yeah. I think, you, me, Ken Scrutato, Carlene Donovan, like
Hmm.
all the old schoolers,
Yep.
but yeah, so I think that, the thing that I always admired most about your work was you always found these really interesting artists and you brought out interesting angles on them to make them, to kind of make them pop. Now, where did you learn how to do that? Is that from being a journalist? Like, is that what helped you?
Well, thank you for one. That's actually really that's awesome to hear. You know, but I think it's mostly from being a journalist. You know, because when you're a journalist, you like, you know, and you're working with, especially when you're working with an artist that everybody loves, that everyone's writing about, you got to find that weird angle. You got to find the thing that sets your art, like, you know, your writing apart from everybody else's. Because if you're just going to write stuff that you can read in a bio, it's not going to be an interesting article. You know,
Right.
so what I usually do with my artists, like, you know, like when I, you know, when I'm working with on the publicity side, I'll send them a questionnaire about what their hobbies are, what, like, you know, what movies they like, what they love to do in their spare time, like stuff that journalists generally write about anyway. But
Yeah.
I actually go a little deeper with some of my questions, and when I actually do that, I actually like I find out, like, you know, some of my artists are really into UFOs. You know, one of the artists that we're working with right now, this guy Christopher, he's in a band called the Nevolutionaries.
Mm.
Um, his music is a little bit more the, like, you know, I mean, it's probably, like we said, Lenny Kravitz meets Slow Dive. You know, it's kind of like
Oh.
shoegaze slash, like, you know, rock. You know, so it's kind of
Mm.
like, you know, the harder edge of rock. So we found out that he's a barbecue guy. You know, he loves barbecue. So we've been
Yeah.
doing a ton of like podcasts, barbecue podcasts, and articles about him doing that. You know, Chuck Reagan, one of my all time favorite artists to work with. Um, he is a fisherman, you know, and so when, like, you know, we started doing articles about him, like, you know, I started putting the fact that he's a mountain man and, like, you know, like a real fish, like, you know, a guy who knows how to fly fish well and everything, that became the central part of our pitch. And that was
Mm.
something that, like, you know, Dan Ozzie, when he was still at Vice and Noisy, he latched onto. I mean, he was already a fan of Chuck, but when he found out that Chuck was wanting to talk about fishing, that became like the angle that he went for, and that set off Chuck on a whole new direction. You know, and people love that. You know, that was like, I think, like, you know, when you find the angle, I mean, it could be the most boring angle, but if you can actually put a little spin on it and make it interesting, that's where you're going to win. You know,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
there's
I agree. Yeah,
mm,
and you know what's interesting? I think that your artist gets more excited talking about that stuff,
mhm.
and it seems like they enjoy doing press more instead of just doing the whole I have a record. Here's when it
Mhm.
comes out, you know?
Yeah. Well, there's a journalist. I mean, I'm sure you probably know him, Sal Bono. He's over at Inside Edition over at CBS,
Mm-hmm.
and and he and I do a lot of work together. Right? Like, you know, he and I do a ton of stuff. Like, we've gotten everybody from Hodor, from Game of Thrones, Christian
Yeah.
Nairn. He's a client. He, like, I brought him over to talk about, you know, like being a DJ, like being an artist who, like an actor who nobody really knew had another life, you know.
Yeah.
So we explored that on CBS, like, you know, on Inside Edition. Like, you know, I brought over Engelbert Humperdinck to talk about his wife who has Alzheimer's. His wife actually just passed away not that long ago from
Oh.
COVID, but
Mm.
But but one of the things that I love doing, especially with some journalists like Sal, is bouncing off ideas.
Mm.
Kind of saying, like I'll get like one of the things I also do is I get to know my artists as friends too. Mainly one reason because I'm always really curious about the creative side, and I love talking to artists and finding that side. But also, it also helps me with pitching. When
Yeah.
your artist backwards and forwards, and you've had those long night conversations at a bar, and at 4 o'clock in the morning, and nursing that last beer, some
Yeah.
really great stories come out. Some really great ideas come out. And I use those in as long as the artist is okay with it, I use those in pitches. And that's one of the things I do with Sal. I'll call Sal and say, hey, I have this artist, what look, this is stuff he's interested in. What do you think? And then we'll work up a really great pitch together, and he'll present it to Inside Edition.
Nice.
It's like that relationship that you have with journalists that really helps.
Yeah, I do
Like
that a
being
lot with
able to.
Brian Reisman. So,
Mhm.
yeah.
It's funny. Brian and I were just actually emailing a little while ago.
Ah,
So,
nice. Yeah,
but
we have our lives are just so parallel, and we have
mhm.
all the same
We know all the same
friends,
people.
and yeah,
Exactly.
exactly. Well, what I tell people is there aren't that many of us left because it was like natural selection,
Mhm.
The people
Yeah.
who weren't meant for it got the hell out, you know.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah. We're we're lifers, we're at that point where we can't turn back. We
I
can't there's not much we can do after if we decide all of a sudden we're going to quit publicity, what do we do?
Believe me,
So
I've tried.
and
I
you
got out.
always come back. And
I
you
got
always
out
come
for
back.
3 years, and it
Mhm.
was it made me like music more, I'll tell you that. Like, I
Mhm.
now listen again to music, although
Yeah.
I'm mostly a podcast person. But I got to
Mhm.
tell you something funny that you'll appreciate. When you get the best of your favorite things on Spotify at the end of the year,
Mhm.
all my top music was sleep songs, like sleep
Sleep songs.
noises.
Oh, you're
Like,
kidding.
yeah, like sleep
the
noises.
the AMSR stuff or whatever they call it. That kind of stuff.
ASMR, a little bit ASMR, a little bit like white noise.
Uh-huh.
So all my top Spotify picks were white noise. I felt like
That's
such an old
perfect.
lady. But white noise for like the first four, and then Run the Jewels. So
Mhm. Yeah, mine were all it was House Martins. It was pretty much all Manchester. It was like House Martin, Soup Dragons, it was like Happy Mondays, that kind of stuff.
yeah,
So all
I could
British music.
predict that about you, though.
Mhm.
You know,
Which is weird because I'm a goth. I freaking love goth, but but that Manchester thing, something about that Manchester thing always creeps in, you
yeah,
know.
yeah. Well, it spoke to you, and that stuff doesn't go away. I still listen to all the stuff I used to listen to. I mean, I have a
Hmm.
whole playlist that's like late 90s, early 2000s EDM.
Hmm.
And it's like stuff that we all worked, like Battle
Hmm.
Flag, Linder worked
Battle
that,
Flag.
you
Yeah, that was
know.
Pigeon Head. That was that it was Battle
Yeah.
Flag was Low Fidelity All
Low
Stars
Fidelity.
versus
Yeah.
Pigeon Head. Yeah.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
that was like, I think Lisa Linder worked that.
Hmm.
Um, RIP Lisa Linder.
Yeah.
And yeah, and so like, it's stuff that like people worked like in the beginning of uh of the Prodigy. I know Mark Shapiro worked with them.
Hmm. Yeah. Rob Morton worked with a lot of that stuff over at Astroworks. With the
Yeah,
Chemical
yeah.
Brothers, Fat Boy Slim, all that stuff. Yeah. No,
Well, yeah,
totally.
because Mark and I used to say I wished I had his job, he wished he had mine, when I was at Roadrunner and he was at um Mute.
Oh, mute. Right. Mute.
Mm.
Mm.
Yeah, 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 yeah. So, I mean, when you're looking for new stuff to listen to, whether it's as a writer or as a publicist, or how do you generally, find stuff that excites you?
Well, it's there's a few different ways. A lot of I'll be honest, I'm like, when it comes to social media, I'm a Facebook guy. I'm not Twitter. I still I get it, but I don't really. It's just too fast for me, like fast paced. It's a blink or you miss it kind of thing.
Mm,
Um, but like on Facebook, I like, just because I have a wide range of friends who listen to all different kinds of stuff, and a lot of my friends will post songs. I'll see what they're listening to,
Mm,
and there's also, I have a lot of DJ friends too, because I used to DJ for a long time. And when you're a DJ, you're always forced to find that new sound, that like that new track before everyone gets their hands on it. But I don't DJ anymore, so I don't really have that search, like that instinct to search.
mm,
So so like yeah, so like it's essentially finding out what other people are listening to. And also like when I talk to journalists, I'll ask what they're listening to too, and see
mm.
what they what they'll turn me on to. Some of my artists turn me on to a lot of bands as
Oh yeah.
well. So yeah, I mean, like it's like some of them will come to me with a recommendation, like say, hey, you need to check out this band, you should work with them, and I'll check them out, and I'll end up really liking the band, but not wanting to work with them, that kind of thing. Um,
That's a thing though. Like,
mhm,
sometimes you like a band too much,
yeah,
and that makes you a fan, a good fan, but it doesn't necessarily make you good to be their publicist.
no, because we take everything personally, you
Mm,
know. It's like I can't. I work with like, well, I mean, I work with Dead Can Dance right now, and they were a band that I absolutely loved growing up. Like
yeah.
for like ever since I was like a like a baby bat. I was actually like Dead Can Dance was always that band.
Yeah.
And now that I work with them, it's like if somebody tells me like oh, I never got it, it's like it pains me right here. Like kind of
Mm,
makes me say like want to say like what are you talking about? You don't get it. Um,
right.
and it becomes a little bit of a personal like it holds a bit of a personal weight there. So
Yeah, I mean, I've always found it's more about the people for me than it is about the actual music. Like, for instance, I worked with Dillinger Escape Plan, and
mm,
I can't listen to that. I mean, however, they're the loveliest people,
mm-hmm.
and some of their ironic pop songs were things I was a big fan of. But, you know, the screaming, I just can't do it. You know?
Yeah, I hear that. Yeah, I'm always amazed that when there's a band that you're like that we grew up with, and start working with them, and they turn out to be like completely different than what you expecting. Like Bauhaus. I work with Bauhaus, Peter Murphy.
Yeah.
And like I was like I remember the first time I met him was over at was it, I can't remember where it was. It might have, actually, where it was over at what's that place called? They just moved recently. It's a sit down place, but it's a big venue down in the down in the West Village. Um,
Oh,
it's
La Poisson Rouge. No, La Poisson Rouge
no,
isn't a seated.
it's actually it's below Houston,
Oh.
but it's a brewery. It's that big
Oh.
brewery place.
Oh, City Winery? No.
City Winery, right? City
Yeah,
Winery.
yeah.
Yeah, Peter was doing a residency there, and that's where
Oh.
the first time I met him, and I was scared. Like like Jody,
Yeah.
his agent, said to me like, just knock on the door. He'll be the only one in there. He'll let you in. And I kind of sat there for about like 3 minutes, like kind of nervous about knocking on that door. And I knocked on the door, and he opened it, and he's like, and he already knew my name. He's like, Ray, come on in. And he put his arm on me, and he like arm around me, and he's like, tell me about you, which kind of shocked me. Like most artists will want to hear about themselves, but he
Yeah.
wanted to talk about me, and so he was absolutely lovely, and he's always been very lovely. I mean, it's like I love working with him.
That's
Really, like
awesome.
it's surprising when you say like Peter Murphy. People are like, oh, is he scary? I was like, no, he's great. So
Oh yeah.
yeah, I mean that
That's
kind of stuff
so
always really
cool.
shocks me. You know, so.
Peter Murphy. Yeah, I mean, it was like that for me when Maria Ferrero introduced me to Al Jorgensen and Paul Barker. I mean,
Hmm.
Ministry was like, and I
Hmm.
couldn't believe it. I kept in touch with Paul Barker for a really long time. But it was pretty
I don't like.
surreal.
I've never met them. Are they like both of them
Well,
really kind of cool?
they're both really cool. Al kept talking about wanting me to come to Australia with them. So, and I'm like, oh my God, I want to go to Australia with Ministry. And Maria was like, relax, you know?
Mm.
And because I was like, oh my God, like all night. But Paul, he is a brilliant guy. And I sat and I talked to him and we stayed in touch and I helped him out with a couple of things. Like it was pretty awesome. He's great.
Mhm. Yeah,
Yeah.
like he's somebody who I'd be scared of, actually. Both of them, Paul and Al. But
Oh, yeah. I mean,
I'll
you know.
I'll take your word for it, though.
Well, after I heard from our friend Howie about Al, I was a
Mm,
little intimidated, but I met him and it was a total shock. So we didn't have time to like
mm,
prepare expectations.
hmm.
We went to a
Yeah.
hotel and Maria said, "Oh, the people we're having dinner with are coming down now." And I see them walking down and I'm like, you know.
Yeah, I could
Yeah.
see that, like jaw drop.
Yeah, totally. Well, it's the same with Peter Murphy. I mean, geez, that's the same
Mm,
level of human being, in my opinion.
yeah,
Um,
absolutely, absolutely.
so now when you were like little Raby and you were a little Raby writer in Boston, like, did you ever imagine that you'd know all these people like you do?
Not at all. Not well. I mean, the weird thing when you're in Boston, since Boston was such a small city, um, like you and when bands came to town, you got close to them. I used to hang out with Bjork all the time. Like
Really?
when Sugar Cubes were coming to Boston, I was with Bjork all the time. Like she knew me, I knew her, and we actually still know each other. I haven't seen her in a while, but
That's so
Sinead
cool.
O'Connor, Sinead O'Connor, Sinead and I we used to hang out all the time. Like
Did
I
you
was at her
talk to
very
her at
first
one
Boston
point?
show. No, but I wish I did. you know, love her, but
Right.
yeah, but she's like absolutely like she was one of my favorite people.
Mhm.
And because like Boston was always so small, you like you really got to hang out with these people and got to see them grow. I remember like going to Tori Amos's
Right.
first show in Boston. And she played this time. Like, she played a press only event, and it was just like maybe 20 of us, in the basement of House of Blues.
Wow.
Sarah McLachlan, same thing. So I got to know a lot of the musicians as a journalist kind of thing, but I never thought that I would actually work with them.
Right.
Um, and yeah, if you said to me Boston me way back when, that I'd actually be working with Peter Murphy and Dead Can Dance and Engelbert Humperdinck and Gloria Gaynor and people like that, I'd be like, you're high.
Right.
But and it's like it's weird because like I still get a little thrill when I'll look at my phone and it'll be an email from like Andy Work. It'll underneath it'll say the Smiths, or it'll be like used to get it like getting an email from like like from Peter, that kind of thing, and you get that little message on your iPhone that there's a new message from somebody, and it's just always like it's one of these things where if I'm with a friend of mine, I'll sit there and show them show them the message on the phone, like look who I got a message from, because
Yeah.
it's still exciting. It's like there's still a lot of excitement for me there,
Well, yeah, I
and
mean, I think that's what gives you your edge too. I mean, like, it still means something to you,
mm.
in a really specific way. And like, I don't know, I still do the same thing. I'm like, look, Tommy Lee texted me, like,
Yeah, I
yeah.
mean, yeah, I remember seeing your emails about Tom, like, or your posts about Tommy Lee, and I was like, yeah, that's actually, he was actually like the metal world was something that I never really quite got like into that much, but there were those keystones, and Tommy Lee was a keystone in the metal world, and it's just like Lemmy, another one. It's just like just being in the same room as them was still kind of would add a bit of like would add so much excitement, you know. And it's like he's definitely a name that gives you
Yeah.
a shiver.
I never liked metal when I was growing up. Like, I just
Mm,
got into it. I got into it to escape a work situation.
mm,
I went in to interview at Roadrunner and they said, "Do you like metal?" And I said, "No, but it doesn't really matter what I like."
mm.
You know?
Well, that's surprising because you do it incredibly freaking well. Everybody knows you as metal as like metal flat. I mean, you like that's like it's like whenever you think of metal, the first person like whenever somebody says like, yeah, do you know any metal publicists? It's like, yeah, Jamie Roberts. Your name comes up immediately.
And you
Like
know what? I
not.
love it because it's the people. You know what I mean?
Mm,
Like, it's never really like only the music for me. It's like the people and believing in them and their art and kind of how that transforms someone. And
mm,
you get to do it on both sides.
Mm,
like you believe in them as a journalist, and that gives them press that they love looking at. And then as a publicist, you believe in them and you make that, you know, multiply. And, and
mm.
I feel like as jaded as we can get, that the only reason we're still in it is because we love it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, that's one thing. Like you were talking about that, like that sense of metal, like the community in metal, and
Mm,
that's one thing I've always loved about metal. Like, I was a publicist for Music for Nations for a little while.
yeah, I
I worked
remember.
within, yeah, Entombed and Paradise Lost and bands like that, and I loved that within the metal community, all the metal writers really rallied behind bands. They wanted to see bands succeed.
Yeah.
It was all about like supporting the bands and being part of that. And like and then you get into like the indie rock world where it seems it's a bit more snarky and people kind
Yeah.
of want to tear it down. They're more apt to tear it down than they are to lift it up.
Well,
And it's the
even
same,
the
like,
snarky ones like Metal Sucks, they still love it,
mhm,
you
yeah,
know?
exactly. I mean, they're snarky, but at least they still respect it.
Oh, sure. I mean,
Uh,
I had been last week, 2 weeks ago, and 2 weeks ago, Ben Humanov from Metal Sucks,
mm,
and he was just saying like they talked about it like they talk about it at home, you
mm.
know?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the goth community is a lot like that. Not as tightly knit and not as uplifting as the metal community.
Mm,
Within that the goth world, it just seems like there's a lot of purists that if it doesn't sound like if it doesn't sound like Christian death,
yeah.
right, like red lorry, yellow lorry, then like it's like the newer side of it. Um, and like, but there's still a lot of like the goth community does embrace a lot of the newer bands, which I absolutely love. But I always loved the metal community for that reason. It
Yeah.
was always such a supportive audience, audience and artists. Like they loved each other. That showed. It was great.
Yeah, it's always nice when the people in your genre, be they journalists or publicists or other bands, when they want you to win and when they support you. It's
Mm,
really cool. It's like nice to watch the metal community do that. And and it's why I really enjoy the genre, because the
mm,
people are just hardworking and quality, and they don't always listen to me, but
mm.
do they ever
Yeah.
really?
No, never.
Right.
And then you kind of crack the whip and he's like, do the "I told you so," and yeah,
Yeah.
we
But
all know that.
so now, do you find that you pick apart pitches because you send pitches, so when you get them as a journalist, you're like, I wouldn't have done it that way.
Absolutely. I mean, I'm on so many so many publicists like email lists now, email blast
Mm,
lists because of the fact I write, and I'll send those. I'll forward emails to like my staff. And it's like, never do this, or
yeah.
um, yeah, like or I'll sit there and I'll tell people, like, I'll tell, like, some of my staffers, is like, this is a really well constructed pitch, like, do it this way. I mean, I even actually sometimes I'll shift my pitches if I read another publicist pitch that's like, that sounds really good and looks really good.
Mm,
I've actually adapted that because, like, it's there's so many ways to turn off the press. There's only like one or two ways to turn them on,
yeah.
and finding out what that like that sweet spot is always the challenge. So.
Yeah, very much so. And I was in some clubhouse room today where press were complaining about bad treatment from publicists, and I'm like,
Mm,
I would like
mm,
be killed if I treated somebody badly. Like
yeah.
why like I don't even, that doesn't even enter my mind to be rude to journalists. Like
Hmm.
I don't get it, you know?
Yeah. Well, it's funny because I had a conversation about that recently with another, like, another publicist who's no longer who a former publicist, and
Mm,
uh, and she and I were talking about how, when she was a publicist, so she's like, I think 10, 15 years older than me.
mm,
She was telling me, like, that when she was kind of out there, there are two different kinds of publicists. You had either the corporate publicist who did everything by the book, or the mean publicists, who never return phone calls and would demand you, demand everything from journalists, like say, like, okay, I have this artist, you need to put them on the cover, you need to do this, you need to do that.
Mm.
And I thought that was really fascinating because of the fact that because I came from the journalist side, I knew a lot of those publicists. I
Yeah.
knew how publicists, I was treated pretty poorly by some publicists. I was treated great by some publicists,
Mm.
And when I became a publicist, I kind of used what I knew, and kind of picked apart stuff that that actually worked for me, and that's what I used, and
Yeah.
that's kind of what it, talk about the pitches, that's what I always do. Like I pick apart the stuff that I like, and I kind of bring them into what I do, because there's you don't have to be mean, like if somebody says like I don't want to do that, if an artist says artist says I don't want to do this interview because I hate the site, you don't have to go to the journalist and say the artist hates your site,
Right.
so we're not doing the interview. And some publicists do that. I know publicists who do that,
Well,
and
that's
like,
junior. That's bush league, you know.
well, no, but yeah, but there's also publicists who are seasoned to do that,
Yeah.
and I've actually, yeah,
Mm.
I've actually encountered a few people I've encountered a few journalists who would sit there and say to me like, take a look at this, take a look at this email that I got, and they would forward me the email, and I'd read it, and I'd be horrified, that they would say like, like the artist doesn't like your writing, so they're not doing your interview, um, and the way that the problem there that I see with that is let's say you're a writer and you absolutely love this band, you love this artist, you want to do an interview, you want to do something, and then the artist comes right back and gives you some really negative criticism that isn't fair. You're going to hate that band, you're going to hate that artist,
But I
you're not
also
going to be
think
able to
it's the
listen to it.
publicist's responsibility not to pitch that person then. Like
No, absolutely, yeah.
know what your artist is gonna like or want to do,
Hmm.
right? I mean, like you said,
Yeah.
knowing your artist well enough to know, like some of them you don't show the writing to if you believe in
Hmm.
what it can do for people. And also older artists, which I don't know if you ever encounter this with like Engelbert or someone, but like, they don't know these blogs. So even if
Hmm.
they're important, like they don't know them. They know Rolling Stone and Spin and the New York Times. And if you don't get that, then it's no good, you
Hmm.
know?
Yeah.
Like I
Yeah.
seldom do print anymore,
Hmm.
you
Yeah, that's
know?
sad. That's
Yeah,
like
it's
the
like, how
fact
am I
that,
going to share it? Scan it in? Like,
yeah. I was talking to Gil Macias. I don't know if do you know Gil? He used to be at Playboy.
Yeah,
Um,
I know the name. Yeah.
yeah, he's actually one of my really close journalist friends, and he and I were talking. He's looking he's talking to a few different publications. He's freelancing right now,
Oh,
and
cool.
he's weighing a few options for like writing, for becoming an editor again.
Mm,
And he was talking about the print world and asking about like certain publications, how hard it is to get into these publications, and uh, and and I was telling him it's not any harder than it was back when there was a ton of other print publications. It's what it is just it's just more competitive,
yeah.
and you have to know the editors really well. I mean, it's all about that relationship, as
Yeah.
it's like being able to get to to get to oh, how who am I thinking of? Mark over at Under the Radar, being able to cut through that clutter and get to him and get into the print magazine is just as difficult as it was back then. But
Yeah.
my relationship with him is so much stronger now because
Right.
there are a lot of other publicists out there who don't know how to pitch him properly, and so he doesn't really pay attention to
And
a lot of
it's
those
people that
newbies.
read pitch better,
Mhm. Yeah.
and we're readers from way back. Like I used to like get as excited to meet JD Considine as I did to meet a rock star. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah, I
Like,
spent hours at See Here on St. Mark Street and buy walk out with back then $20 of fanzines would get you about 50 fanzines,
oh my God,
and I
I used to
remember
spend
going
all
there.
my money there.
Yeah, yeah. And
At
it was
See
always so
Here.
exciting being in there, and then and just kind of discovering something new, like a new writer and new stuff and then yeah, and then meeting them for lunch, meeting those writers for lunch was always a treat. I love that. It was about not only are you fostering your relationship, you're also like, well, I guess you're fostering a relationship because like I
Yeah, but
became
you're
friends
also
with
learning.
a lot of journalists.
Yeah.
Hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
And I feel like some people don't take the time these days.
Hmm.
Like, do you ever get any
Yeah,
really off base pitches? Like,
I've gotten a few. I've gotten one. I got one recently. I'd say probably within a few weeks ago, probably within the last 2 weeks, where it was. It was a country band. I can't remember what the name of the band was. It was a country band, and they were doing the press themselves.
uh,
And all they wrote is like, "We have a new record coming out, or like we winner. Can you do it?" And that was
ugh,
nothing about like who they were or if they even knew who I was. So I responded to them and I said to them, I was like, listen, I was like, you got to have a stronger pitch than that. And I actually sent them an email and said like, I was like, I don't normally do this, but you're like, just because like, you're coming about this completely wrong, this is what you need to send in your pitches. And I
that's
sent them a
really nice
bullet
of
point,
you.
a list of bullet points of stuff that they needed to do the pitches, and they were very thankful. But it was just like, why do you do that? Even some publicists will send stuff that
Right.
I'll roll my eyes at, like I'll roll my eyes and think like, this actually made it out of your
Can
computer,
you do
you know?
something? Can you do
Mhm.
something for me? It's like, no, what's something?
Yeah.
You know
No,
what I mean?
exactly. Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
Can you? Yeah. I like, I want this. I want my artist an American songwriter. What can you do? I mean, that was one of the pitches I got. I mean, granted, they had the other stuff in there, but that was
Yeah.
the gist of what they wrote. You know.
Yeah. And also it's like writers, we got to find a way to get writers paid more,
Hmm.
and like find the model where people can make money again.
Yeah.
And then, I mean, I feel like sometimes, people make assumptions about the amount of time that a writer can take to do something, and like most of them have other jobs,
Yeah. Totally.
you know?
Totally. Yeah, like
Yeah.
when you get an artist to say I can't do an interview at that time that the writer that the writer needs. Let's do it at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. I was
Yeah.
like, you can't. They're working at that time, and they don't understand that these writers have other jobs. And I was like,
Yeah.
they got to feed themselves somehow.
Yeah, and it ain't from this work.
No, definitely not.
Yeah. Yeah. What is your favorite piece you've ever written?
Uh, my favorite piece I've ever written.
Like where you were like, that turn of phrase was just magical. you
Oh,
know? Like
uh,
that
that's a
happens.
tough one. It's a tough one because like I mean, not to sound like not to pat myself on the back with this, but I'm a little bit of a wordsmith and I like to kind of play with words quite a bit. So like it's a tough one because like there's an article that I did for American Songwriter. I mean, forgive me, I don't remember who the artist was, but
Mhm.
we talked about grief. I interviewed an artist and she wrote a record. It was an EP, and the three songs were all about grief.
Mm,
And I was coming from like this past year. I had a really tough year. Like my
yeah.
dog was poisoned. My mother passed away from COVID. All this stuff. I had a lot of friends who passed away. I have clients too, and
Mm,
so like I'm kind of familiar with that territory of grief. And so we talked about grief, and the whole entire interview was essentially about that. And we didn't really even talk about the music that much. But when I got done like, interviewing her, we like I went over all the quotes and everything, and I realized that everything that we had talked about was reflected in the song she had written. And it was like, and the article pretty much wrote itself. And it only took me about a half hour to write the article because
that's
it
great.
just flowed out of me, you know. And like and when it finally got posted on like on the site, the artist wrote back to me and said to me like, this is probably the most amazing article I've ever written, like I've ever read about myself. And she shared it, and then she shared it on her Facebook page. But then I started getting emails from her family,
Oh
from
wow.
like from her manager, like from people within her orbit who thanked me for writing it, because she tagged me on Facebook for it, and so people were
Mm-hmm.
writing me on Facebook, and I thought that was really like really awesome. And that's one of the things that I really I kind of want like wish people knew more about. It's that like artists. like, when a journalist writes something about, like, when a journalist writes about you, they really appreciate it when the artist, like, will post it, like,
Yeah.
and if they don't post it, at least, like, have some sort of like acknowledgement, like that acknowledgement that you wrote a really great article or an article that they really appreciate, goes a long way. I mean, I saw
Hmm.
Annie Zaleski just this past week. She wrote a really great article in the Guardian about Tori Amos,
Yeah,
you
I
know,
saw
and
that.
Tori actually had posted on Facebook something like "Thank you, Annie Zaleski, for the beautiful words."
Yeah.
And Annie, as you know, is a seasoned writer. Annie and I used to like hang out in Boston way back when, and
She
like,
was on the
we
show
and
a couple of episodes ago.
yeah, exactly, yeah. It's like she's so great, love her. Um,
Yeah.
and she was floored. I mean, she's so seasoned, but she was floored by the fact that Tori Amos actually,
Oh,
like, mentioned
yeah.
her name. So it's like that kind of stuff like goes a long way, being really appreciated, even as a publicist, to write to the journalists and say,
Oh,
"Hey, I read the article. That really great. You did a really great job." That kind of thing, like, really, really helps.
yeah. I
And
mean,
as a writer, I
when
love that.
yeah, when I hear the interviews, even, I'm like, wow,
Mm,
that was a really good interview, like,
mm,
or just like, for instance, Jason Rockman interviewed Perry the other
mm,
day, and he had such fun. And I was like, this was the most fun interview. And, like, I know it gives them a thrill because they prep for it. You can tell,
mm.
you know.
Yeah, totally, absolutely,
But
absolutely.
yeah, well,
Appreciation is great.
yes. And to that end, I very much appreciate you coming on. We're almost at an hour, and that's usually when I close
Oh,
out.
wow.
But thank you. This was fantastic, and one day I want to have you back.
Well, thank you. I'd love to be back. This was
Yeah.
actually really great. Great. It's
Oh,
great walking down, like, memory lane and stuff like that.
and you know what? It helps people, I feel like.
Hmm.
That's why I started doing this to begin with, because there's some publicists that never had some of the experiences we did.
Hmm. Yeah,
See, the dog
exactly.
even agrees.
I know she's downstairs barking because I think she wants water or something.
Oh, well, you better go pay attention to the boss over there. I know
Yeah.
because mine's the boss here. But, well, thank you, Ray Roldan. Thank you so much. Thank you guys for tuning